Tonight at 10, the search for the OceanGate sub is over. There are no survivors. After 4 days of exhaustive searching, remains of the vessel are found on the seabed, not far from the wreck of the Titanic.
The debris is consistent with the catastrophic loss of the pressure chamber. Upon this determination, we immediately notified the families.
There were 5 people on board, including 3 from the UK, and friends have been responding to the news of their loss.
All of us in the deep sea, subsea community understand the risks, and when you get news like that, it hits you in the pit of your stomach.
Here in Boston, the US Coast Guard says that the recovery work will continue, but in the extreme conditions on the seabed, there's no confirmation yet as to whether the bodies of those 5 people on board have been found.
Yes, we'll have the latest from John Sudworth in Boston, and we'll be considering the biggest questions for the forthcoming inquiry, also tonight. The Bank of England raises interest rates to their highest level for 15 years. In the latest attempt to slow down the rise in prices. In Pakistan, many families are mourning the loss of relatives on the Migrant boat which sank off the coast of Greece last week. And fact or fiction? Will these tech billionaires really indulge in a bout of cage fighting?
On BBC London, we look at the impact of today's interest rate rise on Londoners and their families. They've been hit hardest as repayments go up again.
Good evening. We start tonight with the news that the search for the OceanGate submersible in the North Atlantic is over. The US Coast Guard says the vessel suffered a catastrophic loss of pressure and there are no survivors. The 5 people on board were on a mission to view the wreck of the Titanic, and rescue experts say that the tail cone of the sub has been spotted on the seabed not far from the wreck. The statement was made after 4 days of exhaustive searching. Now, OceanGate, the company which owned the vessel, said that its chief executive, Stockton Rush, along with passengers Paul-Henri Nargeolet and then Shahzada Dawood and his son Suleiman and Hamish Harding, had all been lost. Much of the rescue effort was coordinated in Boston, and our correspondent John Sudworth is there with the latest.
Huw, you know, from the start, these were very difficult odds. Even if the Titan had remained intact, then this was a race against time. The air supply on board would have run out about 12 hours or so ago. We now know that the disaster was likely to have happened much sooner than that. This catastrophic failure, possibly at the same time as the signal was lost an hour and a half into the dive on Sunday. The US Coast Guard saying today that the families were the first to be informed as soon as they discovered that wreckage on the seabed, and the recovery work will now continue. It was hope of a miracle that drove the intense media interest. Now the US Coast Guard has confirmed all hope has gone.
This morning, an ROV, or remote operated vehicle, from the vessel Horizon Arctic discovered the tail cone of the Titan submersible approximately 1,600 feet from the bow of the Titanic on the seafloor.
The pieces of the Titan were found scattered across a large debris field, and the press were told that next of kin have been immediately informed. It's a very difficult question to ask, but it will be an important one for the families, of course. What are the prospects of recovering the bodies of the missing crew?
This is an incredibly unforgiving environment down there on the seafloor, and the debris is consistent with a catastrophic implosion of the vessel. And so we'll continue to work and continue to search the area down there, but I don't have an answer for prospects at this time.
The wreckage lies under the deep, remote waters of the mid-Atlantic, found by high-tech underwater robots, part of what was, to the end, a still growing, yet increasingly desperate search effort. This video, shot by a Mexican YouTuber, shows it on a previous dive to the Titanic, when questions were already being asked about the uncertified vessel's safety. With a limited air supply, the passengers are bolted in from the outside. The footage, taken last year, shows that communications were temporarily lost.
No, you hear that? Yeah. What's weird is I'm getting the pressures, right?
And Paul-Henri Nagelet, the former French Navy diver, can also be seen, one of those now lost on this latest disastrous voyage, along with 3 British passengers, the billionaire explorer Hamish Harding, businessman Shahzada Dawood and his teenage son Suleiman, and the American captain Stockton Rush.
This shouldn't be allowed to happen again. We need to make sure that submersibles which carry fee-paying passengers are super safe and properly tested down to greater depths than they need to experience.
For $250,000 a seat, this was high-end tourism combined with extreme risk. This far down, on the site of a wreck now synonymous with maritime tragedy, the odds were always stacked against the possibility of a rescue. John Sudworth, BBC News, Boston.
Well, as several of the senior figures involved in the search have already indicated, there will need to be a detailed inquiry, which will take in the design of the vessel, the precautions that were in place ahead of the mission, which the passengers had all formally accepted, was not without significant risk. Our science editor, Rebecca Morell, assesses how the investigation is likely to proceed.
Now we know there's no hope for the Titan submersible and those on board. So what went wrong? It's been confirmed this was a catastrophic failure. 5 pieces of debris from the submersible were found, and it's not clear what else is left. And at this kind of depth and pressure, it would have been an instantaneous implosion. But we don't know when this happened. Most likely it was when comms were lost an hour and 45 minutes after its descent. Or what caused it?
And what we're learning today, in terms of what they're seeing on the seabed, confirmed what a lot of us feared right from the beginning. And the only solace in any of it is that they didn't suffer for 4 days.
Safety worries had been raised by marine experts. So what were the concerns? The Titan's design was unusual. The hull on most deep-sea subs are spherical, but this was tube-shaped to fit 5 passengers in. The hull's material was also different. It was made of carbon fibre. But questions have been raised about its reliability under extreme pressures. And the Titan had not been through any external independent certification process. But a co-founder of OceanGate, who no longer works for the company, defended how the sub was built.
Everyone's got different opinions on how subs should be designed, how dives should be conducted, how expeditions should be conducted. That being said, developing innovations in any new technology, including submersibles, means that sometimes you have to go outside of the bounds of the regulatory scheme.
So what happens now? An investigation will begin to establish exactly what went wrong. But there are questions about who or which country will lead this, given the different nationalities of those involved.
That was Rebecca Morell there, our science editor, with her analysis of the factors that will need to be looked at. Let's go back to Boston and talk to my colleague there, John Sudworth. John, let's talk about the next few days and what the teams there will be hoping to achieve, given the very sad news that they've had to announce today.
Well, we heard from the US Coast Guard that the search effort for the debris will continue. And part of that, of course, the purpose of trying to locate that wreckage will be, in large part, to try and work out what's gone wrong here. That will be very important for the families, you can imagine, and also important for the wider lessons that can be learned. We've just heard there about some of the safety concerns. They were being raised long in advance of this accident. Questions about this cutting-edge approach to sort of maritime exploration, and by piecing together what's happened down there, as difficult an environment as it is on the seabed, will be vitally important, the US Coast Guard says.
John, many thanks again for the latest there in Boston. That's John Sudworth, our correspondent there. The Bank of England has raised interest rates to the highest level for 15 years, from 4.5% to 5%, a bigger rise than many had expected, to try to slow the rise in prices. Now, it will lead to higher repayments for people with loans and many mortgage holders, but savers should see some benefits. But the governor of the bank, Andrew Bailey, denied that they were in effect trying to create a slump or a recession as a way of stifling inflation. What's happened? Well, it takes interest rates back to the period before the financial crash, around that 5% mark, which then was followed by a long period of extremely low rates, which lots of people got used to. So this surge to 5% in recent months is a very painful shock for many. Now, with our political and economics editors standing by, we'll be looking at the factors behind the interest rate rise and the likely impact. And we will start with Faisal Islam on today's announcement.
My monthly mortgage repayments will increase by £270.
£680 more per month for next 2 years.
A scary, petrifying experience.
It's several £100s.
I don't sleep very well at night.
I'm distraught, helpless. I'm cutting costs everywhere.
I can't print the money, basically, to satisfy what is expected of me.
Very stressed at the moment because obviously there's very limited options we've got here.
There are a couple of things that traders need. One of them is foreign exchange.
Outside the Bank of England, history lessons as rates return to their historic norms. So today, more rate rises, more than expected, and possibly more to come as the bank tries to deal more aggressively with stronger inflation by draining spending power, enough to risk a downturn.
We're not desiring a recession, but we will do what is necessary to bring inflation down to target. We cannot continue to have the current level of wage increases, and we can't have companies seeking to rebuild profit margins, which means prices continue to go up at their current rates.
The bank is trying to hose down some very hot British inflation numbers, but also again trying to persuade workers and companies politely to temper both wage demands and price rises.
The immediate question is, where does the Bank of England, where do rates go from here? The markets did seem to gain confidence in the Bank of England's ability to deal with this high and sticky inflation after today's surprise decision. But there are some concerns that changes in the mortgage market, changes in the structure of the economy, have altered the ability of the bank to control where the economy goes.
One of the changes contributing to higher inflationary pressure is a workforce shortage caused by long-term illness, among other things. Andrew in Shrewsbury, a former ultra-marathon runner, one of the many thousands unable to work because of long COVID.
So not only am I not able to work, I can't function around the house, I could barely care for myself at my absolute worst.
But his household hit by rising prices and now the mortgage shock too.
We've got 2 children, we've got a mortgage, interest rates have gone up. We've actually got an interest rate, it's going to change, it's going to probably double in the next couple of weeks.
But despite all the interest rate and mortgage pain, the property market is in a holding pattern, says this Chester estate agent.
I personally don't think there's going to be a collapse. We're in a sort of no man's land. As you've said, everybody's waiting to see what happens.
It might be that rate rises aren't reaching homeowners largely on fixed rates quite so quickly these days, but that means they may have to go higher and stay there for longer too. Faisal Islam, BBC News.
Well, Labour says that the government should force the banks to help homeowners who are struggling with mortgage repayments. The Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, said that all lenders should be offering a switch to interest-only payments for a temporary period to ease the crisis. Downing Street insists that Rishi Sunak is still on course to meet his target of halving inflation this year. Our political editor, Chris Mason, has been looking at the different approaches to the inflation problem.
The Prime Minister turned up at a giant warehouse in Kent this afternoon. The backdrop obvious to all, the numbers climbing higher and higher. The cost of borrowing, the price of almost everything going up. Rishi Sunak is on a mission to reassure.
I'm here to tell you that I am totally 100% on it, and it is going to be okay, and we are going to get through this. And that is the most important thing I wanted to let you know today.
You've said today, you've tried to reassure people this afternoon that it's going to be okay. Isn't the blunt truth that for some people it won't be okay if you're going to be able to get inflation down?
Well, Chris, I've never said this is going to be easy. Inflation eats away at the money in your pocket, and that's wrong. And that's why I feel a deep moral responsibility to get it down, and I'm prepared to do what it takes to do that. That does mean making some difficult decisions.
In a cafe in the village of Hextable, from one table to the next, interest rates and inflation are biting.
Yeah, it has made me think more about what we're doing, how often we go out as a family. I've got 3 teenagers at home. They are expensive, so it is kind of having to say no to things that we might have done before.
Well, I mean, I guess teenagers are always expensive, but particularly so now.
Well, yeah, the what is there to eat is the question I dread.
We've really got to, put in our resources and just be careful, I mean, luxury items are definitely out of the window at the moment.
But something needs to be done drastically, and I think the government needs to step in. They're saying they're not going to step in, but they stepped in COVID and found the money.
Like the Conservatives, Labour also don't want to spend lots more money supporting people, but reckon changing some mortgage rules can help. If Labour was in government today, what would you do?
I would instruct the banks to help customers in financial distress by allowing them to move to interest-only products, extend the term of mortgages, and also not allow repossession orders to begin for 6 months.
But that wouldn't do anything to help inflation, would it?
This is about helping people who are struggling particularly with, in this case, rising mortgage costs.
The Liberal Democrats say they would spend more taxpayers' money helping the poorest.
There needs to be a last line of defence. There has been in the past where governments gave grants to people who would otherwise see their homes repossessed and their families out in the streets.
Bills going up, our economy, our politicians in a bind. Things might have to get worse, for some at least, before they get better.
That was Chris's report. Chris is with me. We'll talk in a second about the political decisions being made, Chris. Faisal, to you first. How much worse could this get in terms of interest rates to start with?
So interest rates, as you pointed out, back up at 5%, 15 years of low rates, near zero rates over in 15 months. That's really bad for those people that have become accustomed to those zero rates. But in another way, in historical terms, it's kind of back to where interest rates kind of really were in normal times before the great financial crisis. Where do they go from here? If you look at where the markets are, what's implied from looking at the markets, heading up to 6% by the end of the year, perhaps another half percentage point rise in August, but it does depend on the data. The bank is still hopeful that inflation will fall sharply over this year, but they did say that before and it didn't happen. So that's where we are there. Also interesting to hear both from the Chancellor and the Prime Minister and actually the Bank of England Governor, a sense in which they're supporting each other in terms of the strategy, but also pointing towards some other causes of this inflation, pointing towards corporates' profit margins, higher prices. We haven't heard that sort of language from them before, a sign that perhaps a pass-the-parcel blame game is afoot, which is never a great sign in terms of what's going on.
Chris, there are decisions being made, and not opting for things is obviously a decision too. Interest rates are one tool. Let's talk about the decisions being made in government.
Yeah, the key thing here is it's all about choices, difficult choices, but they are still choices. So if you offer a lot of support, a lot of financial help to help mortgage payers, the danger is that you make inflation worse. If you rely entirely on interest rates, you squeeze a particular chunk of society. If they suddenly get too high, there's the danger of the economy tilting into recession. So what else could politicians
do? Well, some might argue you could put up taxes. That might help with inflation. Tax burdens historically high. That would be politically toxic, many would conclude. What about increasing immigration? There's lots of vacancies in the labour market. Perhaps that might help. Some have advocated that. Net migration is at a record high. That might prove politically toxic too. And so from the Conservatives and Labour, you've got mitigations being suggested, some in the margins, some less so. Labour setting their ideas out today. We've got the government, the Chancellor meeting mortgage lenders tomorrow. And again, perhaps the more helpful those mitigations are, the less impact that the rises in rates can actually have. So you have limited levers from a government point of view, you have levers in the hands of others, you have levers that might not work, and you have levers that you don't want to touch. Governing and being in electable opposition, never easy, and particularly so in circumstances like this.
Chris and Faisal, thank you both very much. Chris Mason and Faisal Islam there. Now, the UK government's chief medical advisor, Professor Chris Whitty, has admitted that insufficient work had been done on how to tackle a pandemic on the scale of COVID. Giving evidence to the COVID public inquiry, he said that thinking about scenarios which might involve 250,000 deaths appeared morbid. He also expressed deep concern about the threats being made against independent experts when the lockdowns were ordered. Our health editor Huw Pym reports now.
Next slide, please.
They were household names during the worst of the pandemic, and today it was their turn at the public inquiry.
I swear by Almighty God.
Sir Chris Whitty admitted that risks were identified before the pandemic, but not how to deal with them.
We should have had a more imaginative approach to how we would respond to a major pandemic, whether it was influenza, something like influenza, or indeed something else. But this would require quite radical changes in the way people think.
Critics of lockdown said it did too much damage to the economy, but he argued that the expert SAGE committee could only offer ministers health advice.
I don't think SAGE people, including myself, have the competence to assure government that they've considered the economic problem and they can now give a central view on it. I think that would have to be done separately.
Testing capacity known as diagnostics was built up, but it was very limited when COVID first struck, and the former chief scientific advisor suggested this was a serious weakness.
We did not have a diagnostics industry of any scale in the UK, which made scaling up of diagnostics much more difficult. And Germany has a big diagnostics industry and did very well.
Next week, the inquiry will continue to focus on the UK's preparedness for a pandemic, with former Health Secretary Matt Hancock among the witnesses. Scotland's former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon and former Deputy First Minister John Swinney will also be giving evidence. Bereaved families simply want to know whether more could have been done to save lives. Huw Pym, BBC News.
The authorities in Pakistan say that they've identified more than 200 citizens who were on board the overloaded migrant boat which sank off the coast of Greece last week. Now, the boat went down about 50 miles southwest of Pylos. It was last Wednesday morning, according to the Greek Coast Guard. Now, so far, and these figures are rather startling, so far 82 people have been confirmed dead, but the UN estimates that up to 500 people were on board that vessel. Pakistan's Federal Investigation Agency says that it's managed to gather names by contacting the victims' families in that part of Kashmir which is controlled by Pakistan. They've taken DNA from relatives in the hope that that will allow them to identify individual victims. Now, BBC Urdu's Umer Nangiana has travelled to the district of Kotli, and that is in Pakistan-administered Kashmir.
Preparing herself for the worst. Sabir Begum's son Shamrez was on the migrant boat that capsized more than a week ago. He was trapped in Libya for 7 months before making the journey to Italy.
What can I say? They subjected him to worse torture. He had not eaten for 8 days when he boarded the ship. He told me he was hungry. They had kept him handcuffed.
28 men from this village went in search of a better life. Only 2 of them were rescued. Most of the men from this village who made this risky journey had to pay hefty amounts to the human traffickers. For instance, one of them had to pledge his house to take a loan. His family behind has no idea how they would pay this loan back.
He had pledged his house as a guarantee. And go look at that house now. And I have been living in it with my 2 toddlers.
Almost everyone here has a story to tell. Raja Anwar's son and 4 nephews are missing. His son Abdul Jabbar sent him this video from Libya shortly before he boarded the ship.
I saw them all huddled together in a small room like sheep. That shocked me. I tried everything to bring him back from that, but human traffickers said no. They said, "We have taken the money. These men will go forward."
All 5 cousins boarded the boat the next day. Here, 26 families of missing men are desperately waiting for news. Initially, they had hope. Now, they want a closure. Umar Nangyana, BBC News, Burnley in Pakistan-administered Kashmir.
Let's have a look at some of the other stories making the news today. The RMT Rail Union has announced another 3 days of strike action next month. 20,000 workers with 14 train companies will be taking action on the 20th, the 22nd and the 29th of July. Unions are pushing for higher wages, but rail firms they say that they'll not pay more without concessions on conditions. Events have taken place to mark 75 years since the first group of the Windrush generation arrived in the UK. The King attended a service in Windsor. Carnival procession took place in Brixton in South London. The celebrations have been described as bittersweet because of the scandal when many of the Windrush generation were threatened with deportation. In cricket, England's women have had a tough first day of their Ashes test against Australia at Trent Bridge. After winning the toss, the visitors piled on the runs to reach 226 for 3 before losing 3 quick wickets as England fought back. Australia start tomorrow on 328 for 7. Now, of all the unlikely and frankly bizarre stories thrown up by social media pretty much every day, the idea of a cage fight between 2 of the world's technology billionaires is surely today's winner, because Elon Musk, the owner of Twitter, Mark Zuckerberg, the boss of Meta, which owns Facebook and Instagram, have apparently agreed to fight each other in a cage. Mr. Musk has even suggested a location. Where else but Las Vegas? Our correspondent John Donnison has been trying to sort out the fact from the fantasy.
Forget the rumble in the jungle. Think more a tussle in the tech world. In the blue corner, Twitter's Elon Musk, older, carrying a bit more timber, but richer. In the other blue corner, Meta's Mark Zuckerberg, rangy, with an impressive reach, and perhaps crucially, a fighter with form. Here he is grappling in a recent jiu-jitsu contest. And at the San Francisco gym where Zuckerberg trains, his followers think he'll run rings round his rival.
He's got some skill. For a beginner, he's got some skill.
Yeah, Yago's 4 of his last 5.
In recent years, mixed martial arts has been one of the world's fastest growing sports. And it's popular here too. This is a gym near Belfast, where there's a bit of scepticism about a Silicon Valley scuffle.
It's not a good way to settle grudges, you know. It's a sport at the end of the day. I think personally it's probably just a big publicity stunt, which is working really well.
But if Musk meets Mark, will it be no holds barred, or will there be rules?
Eye gouging and biting and small joint manipulation, all that kind of stuff is illegal. Groin strikes, of course. But it's all martial arts put together. So it's grappling, it's jiu-jitsu, it's Muay Thai striking, it's boxing, karate, pretty much everything.
But what does it say about 2 of the world's richest men that they want to put themselves through the likes of this?
Tech giants are considered nerds, right? Being a nerd does not suggest being an alpha male. So they're looking around, well, there's Elon and then there's Mark. You know, who's the king of the hill?
But why climb it at all when you've already reached the top in Silicon Valley? John Donnison, BBC News.
Right, well, the time is nearly 10:30 and Ben is here with the weather. Hi, Ben.
Hi there, Huw. Thank you. Good evening. It's been yet another warm June day. We've had plenty of those of late. 29 degrees, our highest temperature today in the sunniest spots. And as we head through the next few days, actually, things are going to be every bit as warm and a little bit more humid. Humid air wafting its way in. By Sunday, we could well get to 30 or 31 degrees in parts of the southeast. But the warmth today did spawn some showers. Still one or two of those at the moment across parts of the Midlands and eastern England. They will fade. Through the night, though, the first signs of this humid air, more cloud and some rain across parts of Northern Ireland and western Scotland. So into tomorrow, we will have cloud and outbreaks of rain moving across Northern Ireland, up across Scotland. Some patchy rain for northwest England and parts of Wales, and it will be quite breezy in the west. Best of any sunshine, parts of northeast Scotland should do quite well. That will lift the temperatures here, but the highest temperatures of all down to the southeast. Maybe on the face of it, not quite as warm as today, but it will be more humid. So I think it is going to feel pretty warm out there, and we take that humid feel into Saturday with a lot of cloud to start off, some rain in the northwest of the UK, but some spells of sunshine developing, which will lift the temperature as well to 25 there for Aberdeen, 29 degrees in London. But for the second half of the weekend, it's all eyes out to the west because we will have a frontal system pushing its way in. It's going to take a while to get here, but it will eventually bring some heavy thundery rain. Behind it, a westerly wind and a return to something a little bit fresher. But ahead of that weather front, that's where we could see highs of 30 or 31 degrees on Sunday afternoon. So to sum things up for the weekend, it is going to be very warm indeed. The nights will be humid, could be uncomfortable for sleeping, and the increasing chance of some thundery downpours. That's what I've got for you.
OK, Ben. Many thanks once again. Ben Rich there for us. That's BBC News at 10 on Thursday, the 22nd of June. More analysis coming up of the day's main stories on Newsnight, and it's Mark presenting tonight over on BBC Two very shortly. Here on BBC One, all of our colleagues in the nations and regions standing by with the news where you are. But from all of us here on the 10 team, thanks for watching and good night.